Hey guys, it is I, Kuroninja, and from where we last left off, I was interrupted by my producer, Hibiki no Oja. I don't think this will be the last time he interrupts my review, but I had just finished watching episode 12. I feel like there's gonna be a lot more filler episodes than the last part. What a lot of people seem to forget about Super Sentai is that it's driven mainly by the characters, and that's why a lot of people watch it. And now it's time to continue watching Shinken. This episode is focused on Mako and Kotoha, but it's mostly about Mako. It starts with her getting groceries for her cooking, but then an Ayakashi shows up and displaces the children with his own Shiro Oniko. The Shinkengers then show up, but the Ayakashi uses his Aka Oniko to bring Takeru, Ryunosuke, and Chiaki out of the picture. However, Mako and Kotoha work together to defeat the Ayakashi. Now, I have no idea what to say about this episode. Mako's characterization revolves around the fact that she takes more of a support role, but this means she hasn't carried an episode on her own yet. The first time she had a focus episode was episode 4, and she shared it with Ryunosuke. This episode, she's sharing the focus with Kotoha. I have no problem with that since Kotoha is my favorite Shinkenger. We also learned how Mako tries not to look weak when caring for other people. There's also the fact that the other Shinkengers except Kotoha are afraid of Mako's cooking, which is the only thing I remembered about her. So this episode is one that a lot of people might remember. It starts with the Shinkengers finding an American named Richard Brown at their doorstep, and he came to become a samurai after being saved by the Shinkengers back in episode 7. It's interesting that episode 7 was brought up because this episode is also focused on Ryunosuke, who tries to teach him to try and wear him out. But Ryunosuke gets attached to teaching Mr. Brown for his devotion to becoming a samurai, probably because he sees a bit of himself in him. This backfires when a fire-themed Ayakashi appears, and the only one who can defeat him is Ryunosuke due to his water element powers. Mr. Brown gets hurt, and so Ryunosuke has to dismiss him. But in the next battle, Mr. Brown comes back due to a misunderstanding as Shinken Brown. The Ayakashi almost defeats them again after taking advantage of Ryunosuke's attachment to his pupil. But the Shinkengers are reminded that the important thing about samurai is that they never give up, and Ryunosuke defeats the Ayakashi. Now, Samurai Sentai Shinkenger was one of the first Sentai seasons to be discovered by a lot of Power Rangers fans. And I think this episode stood out a lot because of the appearance of a foreigner. If you have studied in Japan or you know someone who studied in Japan, you probably have experienced some people who are like Richard Brown, and they're very passionate about learning the way of the samurai or any other aspect of traditional Japanese culture. This might be why some fans found him endearing. There are also some people who think that samurai fans are cringe like anime fans, but I personally would rather listen to someone talk for hours about samurai than listen to someone talk 10 minutes about anime. Unfortunately, Shinken Brown doesn't really count as a Sentai Ranger, and we wouldn't get an official Brown Ranger until a decade later. Speaking of decade, actually it's way too early. We've got a lot more episodes to cover before I can talk about that. This episode begins with Chiaki failing to learn a sword catching technique, so he goes out to train. At the same time, a prankster Ayakashi with shape-shifting powers shows up, so Chiaki has to take him down. The Ayakashi then takes his form and tries to ruin the camaraderie between the Shinkengers. Kotoha then tracks Chiaki down and tries to find out what's going on, but then the Ayakashi impersonates her and tries to take down Chiaki while he's alone. But Chiaki finds out about the Ayakashi and proves to the other Shinkengers that he had an imposter. The Shinkengers then defeat the Ayakashi, and Chiaki learns how to catch a sword with his hands. I don't really know what to say about this episode, but it was fun, even though it wasn't as fun as the last one. Only one more filler episode to go. In this episode, the Shinkengers are tasked with learning from the Kuroko. Ryunosuke, Chiaki, and Kotoha take it the wrong way and start competing with the Kuroko and helping out the civilians. But then an Ayakashi with an impenetrable shell starts attacking. The Shinkengers then learn that the Kuroko also help in battle by helping evacuate civilians and clearing the area behind the scenes because they can't use Mojikara. The Shinkengers then defeat the Ayakashi by using Mojikara to destroy his shell. I have no idea what to say about this episode, but it was alright. I liked how the Shinkenkers used more of their Mochikara in this episode. Fun fact, when I was watching this episode for the first time, I was surprised that this Ayakashi appeared this early. I thought he would appear later in the series. Another thing I left out is that there was the subplot where Dayu found Juzo washed up on shore and helped him out after he helped her. And now with all the filler out of the way, we can now move on to the second arc. Episode 17 begins with a sushi chef making his way to the town. Meanwhile, the Shinkenkers are called to fight the Gedoshu, but there is no Ayakashi there. When they return, they find a note that reads, "Coming soon." Takuru then senses something, but he's the only one who senses it. The other Shinkenkers then go to investigate the site again, only to run into the sushi chef. It turns out that an Ayakashi with invisibility and magic powers had put a spell on Takuru, and he's trying to spy on him so he can learn the sealing character. Takuru then goes to a sacred lake and the Ayakashi loses him. However, Takuru, not even with Ryunosuke and Mako, can't fight the Ayakashi. Chiaki and Kotoha then show up, but the sushi chef has followed them, and he's revealed to be the sixth Shinkenger, Shinken Gold. The thing is, not even Takuru knows that there is a sixth Shinkenger. The Ayakashi becomes a giant and turns invisible in the fight against Shinken-O. Shinken Gold then summons the Ika Origami, which Takuru recognizes, and the Shinkengers defeat the Ayakashi. Then it's revealed that Shinken Gold is someone with a connection to Takuru, named Genta Umemori. Now, I didn't know much about Genta going into this. When I watched this episode, I was worried that I would find him annoying like Jiro Momotani, but that all changed when he was in action for the first time. Shinken Gold has a cool fighting style. I like how he used the sword, and I also like how the transformation device looks like a piece of sushi when you put a disc on it, but Kotoha is still my favorite Shinkenger. Last episode gave us a taste of what to expect from Genta, and in this episode we learn more about him. It's revealed that Genta was Takuru's childhood friend who wanted to become one of his retainers as a samurai. Chiaki and Kotoha are fine with him becoming a samurai, but Ryunosuke and Hikoma aren't convinced due to the fact that Genta is a bit of a goofball. Anyway, an Ayakashi attacks, but when the Shinkenkers are called to fight him, Hikoma confiscates Genta's sushi changer, and Takuru tells him that he doesn't need his help. The Shinkenkers get defeated by the Ayakashi easily. Mako has suspicions that Takuru is starting to feel weak, and so convinces him to let Genta join the Shinkenkers. Takuru and Genta then defeat the Ayakashi with the help of Shinken Gold's fast fighting style, and then they defeat him again by combining the Ika Origami with Shinken-O. I think Genta Umemori is a good character. He appears to be a comic relief character at first, but he can get serious when he needs to be. Another thing he brings to the table is that Takuru is revealed to have a soft side. So far we've seen him have this serious image, but this opens up more layers to his character. I have a feeling Takuru is going to start opening up more to his teammates in future episodes. And after watching this episode, I can understand why a lot of people pair him with Mako. This episode begins with some casual exposition. Genta shows off the Ebi Origami, which he created himself with digital Mojikara. But the real plot of this episode is that Ryunosuke still hasn't accepted Genta as a samurai, so he decides to figure out how to be a samurai by following Ryunosuke's morning routine. Genta and Ryunosuke end up running into Shitari, who has come up with a plan so that Dokoku can leave the Sanzu River by sacrificing 9 girls in front of a well that's connected directly to the Sanzu River. There's also an Ayakashi who manages to defeat the 2 Shinkenkers by covering them in oil. Despite being defeated, Genta still wants to save them from the Gedoshu. Another key element is Ryunosuke's punctuality, which makes the other Shinkenkers realize something's wrong, and they show up to help defeat the Ayakashi. This episode was also really good, but I already gave my thoughts on Genta when I was reviewing episode 18. What I didn't talk about though is how the Shinkenkers use calligraphy brushes for their Mojikara. But the way Genta uses Mojikara is like texting on a phone. It makes sense he would clash the most with Ryunosuke, the most traditionalist member of the Shinkenkers. I feel like this theme is lost in Power Ranger Samurai because the Samurizers don't look like calligraphy brushes. Now, this is a very important episode. It starts with the Shinkengers preparing for Kotoha's birthday. At the same time, Genta has a chance encounter with Juzo in his human form. Then an Ayakashi shows up and steals people's souls, and the Shinkengers have a hard time fighting him because he has the ability to split himself into a bunch of smaller segments. The Ayakashi then steals Kotoha's soul and declares that he's gonna go back to the Sanzu River and never come back. With Kotoha about to die in one day, the Shinkengers are desperate to find a way to get everyone's souls back. Some of them wonder if it's possible to go into the Sanzu River. That's when Juzo shows up and tells everyone that there is a way for a human to enter the Sanzu River. And to do that, they must give up their humanity and become a Gedoshu like him. Chiaki, who wants to save Kotoha the most, is about to consider it, but then Genta shows up with the Ebi Origami. It turns out that during the fight, he tagged the Ayakashi with some characters, and so they can pull him back by completing the Ebi Origami. The Shinkengers infuse it with their Mojikara, and then after Ebi Origami reaches full size, the Ayakashi is brought back. The Shinkengers finish him off, but in the second fight, Kotoha isn't there, so Genta pilots the Ebi Origami, which transforms into Samurai Henkei Daikaio. Daikaio defeats the Ayakashi with his 3 forms, and then the Shinkengers celebrate Kotoha's birthday. Now here's the thing, even though Ika Origami was introduced at the same time as Shinken Gold, it's treated more as an auxiliary mecha. Usually 6th Rangers have their own mecha that can transform into a more humanoid form on their own, and so I consider Ebi Origami and Daikaio to be Shinken Gold's actual mecha. I think Daikaio is cool, especially how it changes form based on the 4 directions. I do remember thinking that East was used the most, and West and South weren't used that much. Another thing that happened in this episode was that slowly hinted at Dayu also being a human before she became a Gedoshu, just like Juzo. Now here's where things get more complicated. Until now, we've been going through the episodes one by one, but the next episode isn't episode 21. Episode 20 ends with Genta getting the Ika Origami stolen by Kamen Rider DN. And so we have to take a detour to Earth 3. This is a Shinkenger review, not a Kamen Rider Decade review. So if you don't know any of the characters I'm about to mention, there's probably someone out there who made a video about Kamen Rider Decade you can check out. This episode of Kamen Rider Decade starts with Tsukasa Kadoya and his crew arriving on Earth 1 in the world of Shinkenger. Tsukasa finds himself as a Kuroko, and Narutaki shows up to reveal that this world is one without riders. Then some Nanashi appear and Tsukasa is about to fight them off when suddenly the Shinkengers show up. When the fight is finished, Tsukasa follows the rest of the Kuroko. Another thing that happens is that Natsumi doesn't seem to like this world that much, and Yusuke decides to enter the Shinkengers base to find out what happened to Tsukasa. Meanwhile, Genta confronts Daiki Kaito who has stolen the Ika Origami. He transforms into Shinken Gold, but Daiki transforms into Kamen Rider DN and summons Kamen Rider Scissors and Kamen Rider Raya to fight him off. That's when an Ayakashi shows up and steals the DN driver, which causes him to go berserk. Tsukasa stumbles on this Ayakashi and fights him as Kamen Rider Decade complete, but he's no match for the Ayakashi with the power of the DN driver. The Ayakashi then transformed into a monstrous version of Kamen Rider DN and summoned some Nanashi. I've had my own experiences related to Kamen Rider Decade. In fact, Shinkenger was my first Sentai, so Decade was the first Kamen Rider I learned about, but I'll talk more about it later. And if you think the next episode is Decade episode 25, that's where you're wrong. We're going back to Shinkenger with episode 21. Episode 21 takes place in the middle of Kamen Rider Decade's story, so the plot is a bit weird. The Shinkengers are facing the Nanashi that were summoned by Ayakashi DN. Tsukasa has disguised himself as a Kuroko, and Hikoma Kusakabe goes to the doctor to treat his back pain. But he ends up in the photo studio and meets the old guy from Kamen Rider Decade whose name I forgot. The main story focuses on Chiaki and Mako, who run into Chiaki's dad at a family restaurant. Chiaki isn't fond of his dad because he thinks he hasn't helped him prepare enough to be a samurai. But there's another Ayakashi who shows up, and he drops eggs on people's heads to turn them evil. One of those people takes the restaurant hostage along with some Nanashi. Chiaki and Mako are both ready to help everyone get out, but then Chiaki's dad seemingly gets in the way and ends up getting his arm cut. After this, Chiaki joins the other Shinkengers, and they find out that breaking the eggs reverts the people back to normal. Chiaki gets ready to go back and rescue everyone, while Takeru, Ryunosuke, and Kotoha face the Ayakashi. When Chiaki comes back, he sees his dad fight off the Nanashi and changes his mind about him. Then the Shinkengers defeat the Ayakashi, and in the giant battle, Genta joins at the last minute in the middle of trying to find the Iko Origami. This episode is alright. It starts off slow, but the second half is where it gets better. The episode ends with Takeru getting warned about Decade by Narutaki, and then he ends up running into Tsukasa himself. This episode had a lot of stuff going on, so I'll try my best to summarize the key moments. We got Kamen Rider Kuga showing up to help the Shinkengers, Ayakashi Dien summoning 2 Kaijin, Kamen Rider Decade working together with Shinken Red to fight the Ayakashi Dien and Kamen Rider Blade, and then using the final form ride of Kamen Rider Blade and Rekka Daizanto combined, they defeat the Ayakashi together. This episode also focused a lot on Hikoma more than every Shinkenger episode I've covered up till now. Now, after watching Shinkenger and having to watch 2 episodes of Kamen Rider Decade, there's something I've noticed. A lot of people like to say that Kamen Rider is darker than other kid shows, but I don't think they're talking about the themes or the action. I think they're talking about the lighting. Heisei Phase 1 has less saturation than Heisei Phase 2 and Super Sentai, and I noticed that Shinken Pink's suit was slightly darker in those 2 episodes of Kamen Rider Decade. This is also the first time Super Sentai and Kamen Rider have ever had a crossover, I think. I said earlier that this crossover was the first time I found out about Kamen Rider, but I didn't watch Kamen Rider Decade until much later. My first Kamen Rider was Kamen Rider O's, and so Kamen Rider Decade felt different than what I was used to. The only other Phase 1 Heisei Rider I watched before Decade was Ryuki. The Kamen Rider stuff seemed to come out of nowhere when I was watching Shinkenger for the first time, but this is the first time I've watched the relevant episodes of this part the way the people of Earth Zero watched it live. I've had a run-in with Kamen Rider Decade in my 5-year anniversary special, but it wasn't Tsukasa Kadoya, it was someone else with Decade's power. But the crossover is now crossed over, so I don't have to talk about Kamen Rider Decade anymore. Let's go back to the main series I'm reviewing. This episode is focused on my favorite Shinkenger Kotoha. The episode begins when Genta runs into one of his regulars, who is also very rich, and he asks for his help in getting Kotoha to pretend to be his fiancé. Kotoha agrees with this plan while Takeru poses as her butler. Now usually Kotoha is the one who serves Takeru, but this episode switches things up a bit, and it's Takeru who's in the role of Kotoha's servant. There's also an Ayakashi who possesses the rich guy because of his feelings toward Kotoha, so Kotoha pretends to be mean to Takeru to get the Ayakashi out of there. The Shinkengers then defeat the Ayakashi, and Genta combines the Ika Origami and Ebi Origami for the first time to form Daikaio North. I have a feeling you wanted to know my thoughts on this episode in particular. After all, it focuses on the dynamic between Takeru and Kotoha. Now, I've watched Lupin Ranger vs. Potts Ranger, and I've also watched Avataro Sentai Dawn Brothers, so Takeru and Kotoha is far from the worst ship between a Red Ranger and a Yellow Ranger. But I don't see it happening. You could argue that Kotoha has feelings for Takeru, which I disagree with, but I don't think Takeru feels the same way. I think Takeru sees Kotoha more like a younger sister. This episode begins with Dokoku trying to contain a new power which he got in the summer. This causes a bunch of giant Nanashi to show up, but the Sanzu River starts to leak into the overworld, so the Shinkengers head to the Tengen Temple to find the Inromaru, an artifact that can help against stronger enemies. At the same time, an Ayakashi who is banished shows up and forces Shitari to help him get his hands on the ceiling character. Genta also runs into Juzo, who he remembers from his previous encounter in episode 20, and makes him try his sushi. In the Tengen Temple, Takeru comes across a gravestone that belonged to a warrior who became a Gedoshu. He and the other Shinkengers are then ambushed by the Gedoshu, and Takeru gets poisoned. The Shinkengers end up struggling against the Ayakashi while Takeru tries to escape from Shitari. Just when it looks like the Shinkengers are about to be defeated, they are saved by an unexpected Deus Ex Machina, though it's not really a good one. Dokoku pulls the Ayakashi back into the netherworld and punishes him by unleashing some of his new power on him. Takeru is also taken away by Juzo. After the long detour that was the crossover with Kamen Rider Decade, this episode is what I needed to get back into getting excited for Shinkenger. We've gotten more hints at Juzo's backstory, but with Dokoku becoming more powerful, we also got the debut of a new foot soldier, the No Sakamata. For some reason I thought they would have come earlier, so it was very surprising when they showed up in this episode. This episode continues off from episode 23. The Shinkengers are still recovering, and Genta has to complete the Inromaru. Juzo has waterboarded Takeru to remove the poison and then brought him to a cave to recover so he can face him in a duel. Juzo then explains how he became a Gadoshu, and why he wants to fight Takeru in particular. Later, the Ayakashi from last episode is sent to wreak havoc, but he's got more power. The Shinkengers give their discs to Genta and then head out to fight the Ayakashi. Genta then completes the Inromaru in time and heads out to find Takeru. Juzo and Takeru are about to fight, but then Genta shows up and brings Takeru to the battlefield. And then Takeru uses the Inromaru to transform into Super Shinken Red. He defeats the Ayakashi, but the battle isn't over yet. The Ayakashi becomes a giant and fights alongside some giant Nanashi and Nosakamata. The Shinkengers use the power of the Inromaru to combine Shinkeno with the Ebi Origami into Daikai Shinkeno. Then after defeating the Nanashi, only the Ayakashi and Nosakamata are left. So Genta combines the Ika Origami with the Kabuto Kajiki and Tora Origami to create the Ika Tenku Buster and defeat the Ayakashi. This episode was a good one, just like episode 23. I can't think of what else to say about it other than if you've seen my previous videos about Shinkenger, then you should know that Samurai was my first Power Ranger season. So when I was watching Shinkenger for the first time, I assumed that it had been divided into 2 seasons just like its Power Rangers adaptation. Imagine my surprise when I watched episode 24 and saw Takeru transform into Super Shinken Red. I was surprised to find out that Shinkenger and Super Shinkenger weren't 2 separate seasons. I feel like Shinken Gold was an interesting addition to the team. A lot of 6th Rangers have this problem where they don't really do much after their introduction, and they're only there to promote some new artifacts, but Genta represents what happens when some new technology is introduced after years of traditional practices. He also has a really cool fighting style, but another character I found more interesting in this part was Juzo. He doesn't do much in the first part, but after the Kamen Rider Decade crossover, we started to learn more about his backstory and motivation for fighting Takeru. And speaking of Takeru, I'm not saying he's a good Red Ranger or anything, but it feels like he's earned the opportunity to lead his team and take the spotlight. The first series of episodes were all focused on the other Shinkengers, but with the introduction of Genta to the team, he's now starting to open up to them. Anyway, that is all for this video. If you enjoyed, then make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, I have nothing to do with Kuroninja.